history of Boone County with us. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Richard Crisler, and I would like to talk to you this evening about the beginnings of our Boone County. This is perhaps to make myself a little bit more meaningful. I'd like to do so through the words of Colonel K. Johnson, who I believe is the man who really knew all about this time, more than anybody else. And it is my belief that, things just don't happen. Men make them happen. And my contention that Colonel Johnson made a great deal.
Microphone higher. Microphone higher.
Yeah, a lot to do with the creation of this county and of all the doings which happened to it in its very, very early years. Before I do start, however, I would like to express particular appreciation and thanks to four great Boone County historians. One to my left, Stephen Conrad. Next to the further left, very new President Hillary Clinton. Historian is Judge Anthony Crowley, who has done a great deal and helped me a great deal with it. And the fourth one is unfortunately not here this evening, James Duvall. And before I begin the presentation, and we start seeing things on the screen behind me, I would appreciate it if you would all stand and we would give a moment of silence and remembrance to our dear friend Becky Conrad. Thank you very much. And I must say that I realize that although Betsy's in a way gone, she's with us here this evening. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Now, before I begin the presentation of would like to, through the lips of Colonel Johnson, Mr. Conrad has some wonderful things to show you about the creation of Boone County. It's something that you all probably all know by heart, but nevertheless, it's worth looking at. Okay, fire. Okay, Boone County was started, Kentucky County was part of Virginia, and then the next one, that was in 1776. Next one? Yep. Then you see Fayette County, and Lincoln County, Jefferson County, and Boone County is way up there. Okay, next. And then Fayette County was cut up. Madison County took part of it, Bourbon County took part of it, but Boone County remained in Fayette County. Then next. Then Woodford County took an awful lot of Fayette. Boone County became Woodford. And then next. And then Boone County was formed out of Campbell County. And so there we are. All right. Now, I forgot to say that at the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to take whichever questions you might have. So, here is Colonel K. Johnson's narrative. I would reckon that it's about 11 o'clock in the morning on this 4th day of November, 1980. 1833. One week I will sign away the home in which I am sitting, the fields which I can gaze on which I can gaze through my windows. Now, while I will await this happening, I think it's best to recall the first days of what I regarded as my Boone County. It is proper that I do so. As Boone's first county clerk, I participated in every county court meeting, seeing at firsthand which personalities were angling for which favors. I recorded every sale and every purchase of land in the county, and thereby came to know intimately each county citizen of any country. I validated each annual tax list, and thereby knew the value of each person's estate. It would contact everything in the county. The governors of Virginia and Kentucky awarded both my brother, Robert, whom I call Robin, and John Craig and I, land grants totaling, I reckon, over 320,000 acres in the Kentucky Territory. I, for my efforts, received but 12,000 acres. But through these land grants, Robin, John, and I acquired large portions of land in what was become Boone County. And the unit, the three of us counted, by far the most powerful political force in Kentucky. As the future Boone County area began to fill with Campbell County settlers, their isolation struck us all. They needed at least 9 hours on horseback to reach Newport, the Campbell County seat. The wave of creating new counties in Kentucky was long underway. Both Robin and John Jim Gerard, Kentucky's governor, of the Boone County formation, was thereupon assured our frequent Craig Johnson and Johnson to guide Boone County's destiny. Some Trump patrols had already established themselves, and in late May 96, I convinced Robin to ride with me from the south, he from Scott, I from Woodford, to inspect the spot where I was to build my new home on the Ohio, and to see which settlers would be my new neighbors. We made the ride north in one day, leaving Great Crossing in the dim light of early dawn and giving neither of ourselves or our horses much rest. We reached our goal, John Craig's home, after 12 hours or so. John spoke to us of Campbell County folks who had settled here. Almost all of them, he attested, were right here in the most northern part of the county. The earliest of these settlers were John Paul, Lou Louise, and Chichester Matthews, all here by 94/4, and charter founders of the Phillipsburg Baptist Meeting House. In 95 came Jonathan Markland and his sons Dick and Tom, George Corn, and the Reverend John Taylor, the meeting house's first preacher. 9 folk, to the best of his knowing. But the following year, a large wave of settlers moved into the area, along with John himself. All he attested that joined the Phillipsburg congregation. He told us where we could find each. We retired early and set up early. First, I showed Robin where I planned to build my new home. Then we rode up the North Bend Trail, road they called it, and visited in order the Marklands, Chester Matthews, Ben Mitchell, John Hall, and Lou Louise. The day was over. Little light shone on us. We decided not to retire back to the graves, but to fall upon our Uncle Bill Cave on Garrison Run, not a distant ride. Bill, too, was a member of the Phillipsburg, and knew easily who we should visit next. So, as soon as the day broke, we were off. First John Connor, then George Gaines, then Ed Webb, then George Cord, next Forrest Webb, and finally Thomas Whitaker. Then back to Uncle Bill's, a long hot day. Or a little more than deer trails. Bill's boy Ned took our horses. Looking to our next day's travel to the early settlers, Bill told whom we might see. Some 6 more. I looked at Rob. He was peeved and said he could probably return south in the morning. I could not allow my brother to make this journey alone. I asked him to stay the day with the caves and rest up. I would make my next day's visits to Uncle Bill's shore. After morning flight, in 2 days we would be on our way back south. Robin agreed. So in the morning I struck northward and westward. The sun shone bright already, but my day would not be long. I rode down Garrison to its mouth. There lived Jane Cloud. Then west along the Ohio to Second Creek, its mouth. Then Second Creek. Here I would find Jacob Pia, who was building a fine mansion, a rival to mine. He was away. Next up, Second Creek, and then to the Walrus. Suddenly I found I could not get back to the caves and Robin. So I skipped Dan Mosby, Reverend John Taylor, and Taylor Sasby, the remaining Uncle Bill's people. I took my leave of the Waters and rode on back to Garrison. I rested, and Robin and I rode off early the next morning, down Garrison to its mouth, east along the Ohio Trail, past my future house's site, and up the hill to the Martins. We were on our way south, and we arrived at Great Crossing while good light still shone. Robin and I agreed that our trip, while arduous, was fruitful, especially for me. In 5 long days, we had made the rounds. All of these folk had long preceded me. They were, I might say, Boone County's original settlers. It struck us that every soul we had visited was already a member of the Bulletproof communion, a strong, unifying force, we thought. After our visit to the north, Robin and I set out to determine the structure of the county leadership, the justices of peace who would control the county court. For that, Governor Jim Garrard, who was ready to appoint such men, relied heavily upon our guidance, and we provided it. We made each of our selections for the justices carefully, judged how we could count on each to act responsibly. Who were they? John Connor was our first choice. John was a close neighbor of Uncle Bill's, and he strongly suggested that we choose John. Bill's word was gold in our ear. Here's John Connor became our man. Furthermore, John was not a member of the Campbell County political set. He had no ties, binding or personal, to the county we were about to leave, as none of us did, and we liked it that way. And we wanted no competition for allegiance among our judges. They were beholden to us, they would follow our guidance. Johnny Hall was our next pick. I regarded him as a well-known, respected individual, one I could trust completely. Hall had taken a leading role in forming the Bulletproof Church. More importantly, Johnny and I had become close personally. In October '99, he posted a $1,000 loan. He posted bond for a $1,000 loan I received from the Campbell County Justices. This money would fund the construction of my own town of Bulletproof. Shortly, John and I were heavily indebted. But Bulletproof was a bust. Not a sod of ground was broken, so no money had been spent. By 1810 or so, the matter was dropped. It was an embarrassment, but it certainly allied Johnny and me closely. Our next pick, John Brown, had been a captain in the Revolutionary War. For his military service, the 4 governors of Virginia had awarded him 10 land warrants amounting to some 36,000 acres here in Kentucky. After John Craig and me, Brown clearly was a large land holding resident here, an excellent qualification. Thus we had 3 fine candidates, but who would be our 4th and our 5th? No one was left about the Sand Run, Garrison Run friends. This was October '98. Time was running out. Then Robin, a practical man, suggested we give the court a wider county significance. Archibald Reed thus proved to be the fourth of our choices. He gave us the geographical spread Robin wanted. Located in the extreme southeast corner of what would be Boone, Reed's Tavern was the terminus of the first road to be opened in our new territory. Unfortunately, and especially embarrassing for us, Archie's performance as a justice proved to disappoint. He simply did not show up. After the court's 29th session in early November 1802, he missed 21 of the next 22 court meetings. Archibald Reed attended but 10 of 50 Boone County court sessions while he was a justice. In these years, his property holdings were also declining. The 1800 tax file showed that Archie owned 400 acres on one lake. 3 years later, this average decreased to half that, 200 acres. His tavern was gone. Accounts have him starting a second tavern in 1805, when described as, quote, small, dirty, one-room cabin where meals were mush and milk. For our fifth candidate, I turned to my nephew, Dick Parker, in Wilbur's Bottom. Dick was married to my niece, Hannah Cave, Uncle Bill's only daughter. I offered Dick the justice position, but he turned it down. His landing on the Ohio was picking up nicely. He just could not spare the time. However, Dick stated that his neighbor, Dan Mosby, had a son-in-law who lived in Kansas, a man of whom he thought highly. His name was Archibald Houston. I knew Dan well. He was a good man, and the man he allowed his married daughter, he allowed to marry his daughter Betsy must be a good man also. And thus we came to Arch Houston. We felt we could rely upon him. Our kid, Hannah Cave's husband, Dick Parker, had recommended him. This gave him credibility and our trust. Houston would be loyal to us, family and friends by. Now, looking at the notes I took on the county's taxes, I noticed that Boone was growing, but not as rapidly as we expected. Only at the rate of about 14% a year. The tax files also show a most marked disparity between landowners and non-landowners. The number of landowners was almost twice that of those owning no land. This disparity disappeared as the years went by. Why? I reckon it's because early on, many Boone settlers owned no land. They leased it from absentee landlords. The governors of Virginia, then Kentucky, had distributed most of Kentucky's territory in land and military warrants by 1800. Although patents and preemptions, through patents and preemptions, speculators had grabbed up much of the rest. Little was left. Over time, those leasing land where they lived and farmed had bought it from the owners who felt the need for money. The rise of numbers of acres taxed in these years also caught my eye. From just over 25,500 acres in '99, the tax average in the county rose to nearly over 4,000 acres in 1804. The number of slaves, as we expected they would, also grew, and it was similar with the third taxable property item, horses. Actually, their growth rate in the first 5 years exceeded that of slaves. What does this tell me? That in spite of its relatively modest population growth, the county was thriving. It was employing an increasing number of both slaves and horses, particularly the latter, in what must have been productive and profitable enterprises. Boone County's beginnings were most healthy. But the most striking fact about Boone County during its earliest years was the disparity between the north and the southern parts of the county. In Boone's second tax year, 1800, the court tried had an experiment at our behest, I might add. 2 tax files for that year, one for the north and one for the south. Using these tax lists, I could determine for the following years which settlers lived in the northern and southern portions of the county. These figures confirmed what much of us knew already. Every sane new settler chose to stay close to water transportation. At that time, overland transportation was essentially non-existent. Boone's first tax years, 99, showed that almost 6 of 10 taxable settlers lived in the northern district. This difference widened. 4 years later, 148 settlers lived in Boone County's north, while but 81 of their counterparts resided in the south. This divide became even greater when one compared landowners to non-landowners. In 99, the northern landowners amounted to 46. The southern landowners were but 11. The trend narrowed a bit as the years went by, but the divide remained great. The numbers related to the tax acreage showed similar results. By 1804, the tax acreage in the north was twice that of the south. These figures tell a simple story. Throughout the first 5 years of Boone's beginning, its more prosperous citizens preferred to live and work in its northern rather than its southern half. And finally, how to move these settlers from Boone's shores into its middle. Inland roads was our answer. Before Boone's creation, the Campbell County Court had taken steps to open travel between the county seat and its western wilderness. For instance, the court ordered the road be opened from North Bend to reach Tavern down south. Then one would proceed up north to get to Newport. The road, no better than a widened trail, was most cumbersome, but it was our first. The next court move made more sense. In the middle of 96, it ordered the road open between our one settlement and our station to the east through Dry Creek. I later convinced the court to order away from my planned town of Bullisburg, south to Craig's Camp, which I knew would be Boone County seat, all the way down to Big Bone on the Ohio. With Boone's beginning, however, priorities changed, and they changed dramatically. We saw to that. We determined that the future county seat would be the hub of the South, which all roads would be like the spokes of a Boone County wheel. This we decided long before the June 1999 founding meeting. It surprised no one, therefore, that the first roads in the first county court order fitted our intent. At its first meeting, the court ordered that a road be viewed and marked between my town of Bullisburg and the seat of justice, the county seat, as the county seat was then referred to. Realized that neither Bullisburg nor the seat of justice yet existed. The court then ordered that 2 other roads be viewed and marked, one from the seat of justice to reach Tavern, the terminus of the North Grand Road, and one from the seat of justice to Tanner Station. 2 new roads to the courthouse followed. The next in early 1801 led from the courthouse to Walker's Bottom. Further roads developed along these lines. The road between the courthouse and the county line at Dry Creek to the southeast, one in the north between the courthouse and the mouth of Second Creek, and one to the west, connecting Lifton Landing on the Ohio near East Bend. These were establishing just the kind of network we had in mind. The court also ordered a view and marking the new road from the courthouse to a place in the south they called the Salt Works on Mud Lick. The road made sense. Wilmington would become a central distribution port for salt, a highly praised commodity. Early Boone growth kept our attention well. 7 main roads led from the courthouse into the principal areas of the town. Court could thus focus on feeder roads from these main arteries. The court ordered the road to connect the courthouse with the first of the Boone County area's main roads, left from North Bend to Reed's Neck. Similar decisions, the court ordered the opening of another feeder road, one from the courthouse to the Tanner Station Newport Road. This activity continued. In those early days, road building was the county court's highest priority. In the early 1800s, it ordered the road connecting Walker's Bottom to Tanner's Station Courthouse Road, and later away from the courthouse to the already existing Tanner Station to Newport Road. A road tying Dry Ridge to the courthouse, Big Bone Road, one from off the Garrison Run to the Second Street Courthouse Road. The court was ordered more feeder roads. I cannot remember them all. All these feeder roads gave the early Boone County citizens greatly improved access to their county seat. That was certainly our plan. With this, my reminiscence of Boone beginnings must end. I must now turn to my own troubles. I understand that Polly will erase my debt with the Bank of the United States, and that I will, in return, will sell everything I have, leaving me essentially destitute. Thus the end of Colonel K. Johnson's reminiscence about Boone County. As a postscript, Polly did buy K. Johnson's estate, his magnificent home, and she did, as he predicted, return to Central Kentucky, to Lexington, where her sister lived. But Polly, mindful of the prior greatness of her father-in-law, and of the fact that he was indeed her kin, her grandfather's brother, generously allowed K. Johnson to remain in the house he had built in North Bend for the remainder of his life, which lasted for longer than anyone ever expected. Another 17 years. Colonel K. Johnson left his life at 8 in the evening on January 19th, 1850, in his home on the Ohio River. Thank you very much. And I will be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Crisler?
Yes, sir.
I want to make sure I heard something right. The letter from Kay, and he's talking about his first, second, third, and fourth name travel. I believe he made a comment there that he stopped at the Pyatt House about the fourth day. What year was that? Was that 96 or 7?
Let me go back. 96.
Okay, because that answers a lot of questions as to when they actually started to build federal law. Thank you.
I wanted to mention something. I may have jumped through these slides pretty quickly when we were starting. This one was one of the earliest settlers in Rhodes that he was talking about. And John Jones, the Martin family, John Hall, and the
Christopher Matthew.
yes. And then you'll see 2 roads on there. Those were the earliest roads that we know of in Boone County. He was talking about a lot of people moving in, and this was a listing of 24 people that had moved in. And you'll notice most of them, forgive me for not using the microphone, you'll notice most of them are settled up here in the northern part where he was talking about. And And I attribute that to the fact that so much of this land up here was beautiful bottomland. And I noticed that in Dr. Crisler's home, he was mentioning that even during the 37 flood, which was one of the highest we've ever had, it didn't quite even come up to his house, which is the Cave Johnson house that you're seeing on there. So this bottomland was very precious, and people were settling in that area. And I do know we did the history about the Bulletsburg Baptist Church, which was located over in this area. And that was established really early. And there was a seed church that started many other churches. And it was sort of the center of the community and the people that lived in that area. That's why there were so many people who lived here. Now, you'll notice there were other people who were settling here, and we had some down here around Mud Lick, and over, I think he was mentioning Archibald Reed, which lived over here on the pit 24.
Archibald Reed was at what became Gaines
I
Tavern.
think it would eventually become Gaines Tavern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you all know about Gaines Tavern, that's right where Archibald's first tavern was.
You don't mind.
No, please do it.
Okay. And he was talking about the first 5 judges, which most of them were in the north, and then of course Archibald Reed was in the south, the one that didn't show up for one of 22
Right.
years.
Yeah, Archibald
But
and John
anyway.
had it together.
Yeah, and many of you may, if you've been to Petersburg, you'll notice we've got a highway marker for Tanner Station, which is located over in the Ford area. And was one of the very early settlements too in Boone County. And as I've mentioned before, the Ohio River was the Interstate 75 of its day.
That's right.
Of traveling. And then eventually they started putting in the original first roads. Let me go down to where the roads are. Yeah, these were the first ones developed, and then as you can see, they started putting in what they call feeder roads for those roads to connect to other areas, and during the first 5 years, that was very important. We've got some pictures down here at the end. This is Cave Johnson House. It's, of course, it's a more current picture. And I have 2 pictures of the Bulletsburg Baptist Church. This was an early one, and then this is a later one. I think that's Pastor Kirtley in front of the church in this particular photo. James, yeah. And then this is the only image we could find of Federal Hall. Go ahead, Jim.
There is a picture showing the house in about 1880.
1880.
Yeah, it showed that it had a double-decker in front and back
Really?
balcony.
Okay.
Steve, is there anything left of Federal Hall? It's been about 35 years since I've seen it.
Well, it burned, and there's just a shell. You could answer that question.
That was about 1975 or 6.
Okay. All right, and we got a couple more. This is a picture of the early courthouse that was built in 1817 in Boone County.
So that was the second one, correct?
Probably
right.
was.
First one was a log cabin.
First one was log cabin, then this
Log
one,
Right,
and then the current one?
no,
No, there was one in between,
yes.
yes. And then the current one had to have the thing replaced on the top, right?
To
Okay.
keep it up.
All right. And we have one final picture.
Well, as Stephen Conrad mentioned, the Ohio River was really our interstate. And Boone County is, as far as I know, is unique in that it's the only county in the United States that has 2 of its borders formed by a single body of water. I mean, the northern and the western body borders of Boone County is the Ohio River.
Yes, yes.
about 40 miles.
And one thing I remember Dr. Crisler mentioned years ago, the Ohio River was not that deep, and people frequently traveled across the river to the other side. And like the early settlers in the North Bend area were great friends and neighbors of the people on the Ohio side, like
Harrison,
The Harrisons.
Harrison's and the Cleves.
Harrisons, and yes, they were all very good, they were almost like neighbors. In fact, at one time, it was more difficult to get the mail by going up to Bulletsville to get mail. It was easier to go across the river and pick up their mail on the Ohio side than it was to go up the hill. So
I have a
that's how.
question. So, many of those early settlers were Revolutionary War soldiers, correct?
Right.
Do we know how many? Tony might know, he's worked on that. Do you know?
Show them how many. No, not all of them, I'll tell you. Going back up there, I can tell you.
Back to that, for the one that shows the list, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I can pretty much bet
So,
on this.
now we have somebody working on that, but for a long time, we were trying to figure out if there was like a, sort of like a chain settling going on with people who were in the war, knew each other, and, because this is not bounty land, right? This is land that they bought. So it's interesting to see those settlement patterns.
Some of them were from the French Indian War. so
Right.
That was King's War.
Yeah, that's earlier. Oh my gosh, you've gone so far back. Good for you.
But that was the one question I was going to ask
Yeah.
Richard about, the Joseph Smith. There were two Joseph Smiths, one who came with William Cave and John Holland Chichester
Right.
Matthews to set up the church. And he was only here for a couple of years and went back to Guilford County. Then you have the other Joseph Smith, who was a land speculator who, had to own Petersburg, Bullsville, for the first owner there, and he got that from buying somebody's King's
He
War.
didn't live in Petersburg, he didn't live in Tanners, did he?
Do what?
Did he live in Tanners? Was he a resident?
Who's that?
The second Joseph Smith.
He owned all that land down there. I don't know if he ever moved here or not.
I don't think he lived there.
Yeah.
He wasn't a resident. Because, I have to admit that these figures are based on the taxes
Yeah.
and the boys in either county were naturally very concerned to get as much dough as they could from the settlers. And so the tax list gives us a pretty good idea of who was living where, when. And if Joseph Smith was not on the Petersburg, they also gave a location of where they had the land that they were taxing. And I didn't see it.
Were they primarily Virginians, and then we had some from the Northeast and
Right.
into Pennsylvania, but primarily Virginia, right?
Right. I mean, that was the basis for all my research, was the tax list.
Yeah. If you all don't use tax lists, you should, because they're really.
And okay, they'll miss some every year, they'll miss some
Sure.
occasionally, either because they want to or they just miss it.
But they can tell you a lot about where people are, where they end up between the big record sets.
Did the 1800 census have a big impact on the tax list?
The question is, did the 1800 census have an impact, big impact on the tax list, like the change?
The trouble is that only in later years did they give you a value of the land and the horses and the slaves that they were taxing, and the people who had to pay tithes and the tithe. But in these early years, they didn't do that. So there's no way of telling. You can only tell number of acres.
Right.
And sometimes they would say, this is the first class land, this is the second class land, this is the third class land. And they use that obviously for their tax basis.
I know 18 out of 24 definitely were Revolutionary War soldiers.
So Tony says 18 out of the 24 were definitely in the Revolutionary War, so that
The
gives you
others,
an
the other ones
idea.
we don't know yet.
Right, right. So there was, I mean, and of course that's timing as well. You know, if you were a male of a certain age, you probably were fighting on one side or the other, and you'd be gone if you were on the wrong side. So that does make sense, but it kind of helps us see how these people, the way that Dr. Crisler mapped it out, you see those clusters of settlements mostly in the north along the river, but then you had things going on down at Big Boone, and you had a little bit over here. But it seems like somebody put the word out, and you tell your friends that they come and get this land too. It's a good place to settle. We've got good land here.
This did change over time.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, sure.
the Big Boone area became a center for people in Mud Lick and that area, and they started. But they all settled along streams,
Yeah,
along water.
sure.
They didn't sit out in the middle of the land, they looked where the silly water was, whether it was Middle Creek or Big Bone or any of the creeks down there. Gunpowder,
Gunpowder goes all over the county too, and all of its little tributaries, so you all might know that, but when you're looking at something like a tax list and it says that the water course that the person lives closest to is Gunpowder, they could be in a lot of different places in the county. So you have to kind of know the mapping of it too, that kind of helps, but he's right, I mean, you have to have the water, so they had mills that they were building, of course, along these water courses as well. There's a lot of creeks there,
Yes.
and those are just the main ones.
and they were much bigger and wider and deeper than they are today.
Yeah. It's the opposite of the river, right?
Yeah.
The river was smaller.
Because today, with the housing development, they siphon off all this water, all the rainwater.
So, was Dry Run always dry? Because
No, dry run wasn't always dry, no.
that was it.
They call it dry run, but it wasn't dry.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I mean, I remember when there was a bridge over there, that not the one that's now, but way
Oh,
up
yeah, yeah.
over. And
I've heard. What other questions?
Do you think people traveled along the creek very much? And if so, was it some kind of boats or canoes or?
they did. Probably the creeks weren't that navigable, but they were, I mean, really had major bridges where now there are fords. There were bridges. And if floods came, those bridges wet. They had to build a new one. And remember that you weren't driving 18-wheelers across those bridges, you were riding on a horse across them.
There were covered bridges too, several covered bridges in
Yes.
this county, for those of you who love covered bridges. Yeah, several. You have to read your newsletter part. Little nuggets. Anybody else have any questions?
So I have a question. Of the roads that you identified that were some of the original roads that they made, do any of them correlate with what we're driving today?
She's asking if
Four lane?
if the original roads, if some of those early roads correlate with current modern
Oh,
roads.
very much.
Yeah.
Oh, very, very
So can you
much.
identify
Oh,
like
very
what
much.
we're driving
Oh,
on?
yeah. You can see it.
Yeah.
For instance, they have a road, in Port Orders, they talk about a road from the courthouse to where was it, Fredericksburg? Yeah, Fredericksburg, which used to be, which became Warsaw. And
It's exactly,
I've been
yeah.
right. That is, that's 42.
So do you all see where, so that's Burlington now?
Yes.
You see how when he was talking about the wagon wheel and how they made a conscious effort to branch out to all the various parts of the county that were becoming settled like a wagon wheel.
Yeah.
You can kind of, I mean, not exactly, but you can see it's going all those directions, and you all know that all of our areas can be.
It was a change. First, Capital County was, let's get everybody into Newport.
Right,
And as soon as Boone County was, let's get everybody into Wilmington.
yeah.
Yeah, because that earliest when it was still Campbell County.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right.
But you would, most of the early years of the county court all had to do with building roads.
Right.
And then somebody would move somewhere close to a road, and then they would appoint people to see whether they could alter the road and take in that new house, and that person would pay for, you know,
Well,
Pretty
altering
important
the
to
road,
think
so
about.
everybody would get access to the road.
You can't have a society without being able to get through it, so that's good. But they paid a lot of attention to it. They had to.
the earlier inception of this whole thing was started a couple of years ago. And it gave me, unfortunately, enough time to do a lot of research. And I remember when I submitted the first draft of my speech, or my talk to this meeting, and everyone said, oh, that's very nice, we'd like you to keep it down to about 35 minutes. And I timed it, and it was over 3 hours.
So, and it was very, very good, but it was a little.
So, I'm not going to let that go to waste. I think that we reform that and perhaps make it into a book which you all might enjoy, which would incorporate the figures, this, with a lot more statistical information. And I was looking for a conclusion. Not conclusion, much conclusion. I thought, well, the cave might reminisce on what it's like today compared to what it was like then. And so I said, well, where's the map which would show me which roads exist then, 1833, and there is no road, there is no map like that. So the answer is to go through the court orders and see what should be viewed and marked,
Right.
and alterations all over the place. I've done that, and there are some 160 entries.
So if you all are looking at, you're doing your own research and you're looking at land transactions, so you may have these roads that no longer exist, but you may have roads that do exist that have different names. So a map like that would be hugely appreciated here in local history, if you ever want to share that with
I
me.
think it is probably, although I haven't checked it, I think it is probably reasonable to expect that the roads, not only then, these, particularly these, but even the roads later, still exist in one form or another.
And if you look at some of the, well, of course, you know, along the river, sometimes the roads tend to crumble off a little bit, and they have to keep fixing them. I know my mother grew up in Kenton County, and she was always under the impression that they just took those original trails, and they didn't even re-engineer, and everything's pitched the wrong way, and, you know, but they're basically in the same place. They just paved them, widened them, graded a little bit, and kept going. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of new stuff happening in our county right now with these great road projects, but if you look at Pleasant Valley, there was a road there, you know? I mean, it existed, it just wasn't giant and, you know, taking over.
Well,
Yeah, North Bend as well, right?
yeah. A particular example close to me is that Sand Run. You take North Bend Road, which is now River Road, but it was North Bend Road before, and it had one sort of exit up into the hills, what we call Estes Hill, and but to the west, further to the west, Cave Johnson had a ferry, and he used a road which was much easier to get to because the Estes Hill is very steep and winding and treacherous. And it went along Sand Run, and it was the major thoroughfare to Bulletsville, and to Bulletsburg, and to the center of the county. It doesn't exist anymore. I mean, the path is sort of there, and you can kind of see it through bushes and stuff like this, but even when I grew up, which is some time ago, you couldn't drive a car up through there. But you could, horseback, people would go from there, our place, up to Sand Run, and not up the other way,
Right.
through Francisville.
Right.
It's gone.
Why did it disappear, you think? Just didn't need it?
Because it wasn't a thoroughfare which one could use with an automobile.
Right, right,
That's the simple reason.
yeah.
I mean, on horseback you could do it,
Right.
but after a while, you know, where, I remember when it was, you saw a car sitting by the side of the road, you said, get a horse. I mean, we don't even have any horses anymore. I mean, it's a different time.
Anybody have any other questions? Have a chance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we're going to do just a little bit of meeting business
Yes.
after Mr. Crisler is finished, and I'll tell you all a little bit about what's on the table if you haven't already picked up. It's some new stuff.